I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It appears that we have our panelists here, and of
Bryan,
course,
could you turn my video on if you can?
your video is on, Matt.
Oh,
I think. Hang on.
it says unable to start because the host has stopped it.
Oh. Well, let's not do that. Participants.
Hi, Scott. Hi, Tara. Yeah, I see. Loyalty. Riquetta would be proud.
Well, this is frustrating, Matt. When I go over to change you, it highlights some other features that what I'm going to do. Hang on just a second. Thank you for all your patience, folks. Oh,
Hello.
hello. Well, so now this is the official beginning of our webinar. Thank you very much, everyone, and welcome. We're excited to have you join us today as we discuss ideas for student participation, parent involvement, and student engagement with DI distance learning. My name is Bryan Wickman, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the National Institute for Direct Instruction, NIFDI. I want to thank you for joining us for this forum. Because of the current circumstances, educators are faced with an even more daunting task than usual. How do you continue the important work of educating our students when you cannot be in the traditional classroom setting? To help you, NIFDI has launched this series of webinars and forums to help your students experience success with direct instruction at the same level that they would if you were in the classroom with them. Please keep an eye on your email inbox and our webpage for announcements of upcoming events. Topics will include a range of subjects, including specific information on programs and distance learning teaching tips. As always, we want to hear from you and support your efforts. Please feel free to reach out to us at info@nifdi.org. Today's forum on parent involvement and student motivation and participation, I have three panelists who have been working hard to provide DI to students through distance learning over the past few weeks. This is a live session, and we welcome your comments and questions via the Q&A feature. To find the Q&A feature, click on the Q&A at the bottom of center portion of your screen. You have view options at the top right-hand corner of your screen. Click on View Options and select side-by-side mode to see all of the panelists at the same time. My colleague, Rochelle Davison, Coordinator of Training for NIFDI, will be scanning your questions as we go along. We will address some of the questions throughout and near the end of this session. Please note that you are muted at this time and will continue to be through the rest of the webinar. So you'll need to type in your questions and answers or questions so that we can see them. Today, we will discuss student participation parent involvement, and student engagement and motivation. Before we start, I'd like to briefly introduce each of our participants and ask them to tell us a little bit about their schools, as well as their engagement with DI and distance learning. Why don't we start with Matt Hornbeck, who's a principal at Hampstead Hill Academy in Baltimore, Maryland. Matt?
Thank you, Brian, and thanks for having us here today. Hello from Baltimore. It's a strange new world of distance learning out there for everyone. I'm Matt Hornbeck. I'm the principal for the last 17 years at Hampstead Hill Academy, which is operated by the great Baltimore Curriculum Project, charter operator for a number of schools here in Baltimore City that use direct instruction and with great effect, and really view it as the engine for all the great work we can do with kids. And we have about 859 students in grades pre-K through 8. And I'll leave it there. And Brian, you want to kick it over to someone else to introduce themselves?
Scott Aguila, would you care to introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, so my name is Scott, or Mr. Aguila, as my students call me. I teach pre-K at City Springs Elementary Middle, which is also a part of the Baltimore Curriculum Project. And yeah, we're mostly like 95% African-American, low income, free and reduced lunch. And so yeah, a big challenge early on was getting technology out to people, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us, Scott. And then next we'll go Tara Davis, a NIFDI implementation manager, joining us from Wake Forest, North Carolina. Tara?
Hi, thank you again for having me as well. So my experience right now, I'm currently an implementation manager for NIFDI. I have several schools in San Antonio that I work with. I also have some schools in Florida as well that I work with. Currently, my schools in Texas are doing a variety of things with distance learning. I have some that are doing live lessons and some that are sticking with the pre-recorded lessons. I think that those that have started with the live lessons, unfortunately, have backed away from that a little bit. And so the majority of them now have been leading towards doing the pre-recorded lessons. But I work with grades K through 5, and mainly the programs they are using are the Reading Mastery and the Direct Instruction Language programs as well.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And yeah, we do want to point out, it's an interesting side comment regarding the moving away from the live delivery of direct instruction. NIFDI really, that is the standard that NIFDI puts out, that we support. Also, though, recognizing some of the realities of access to machines, time, those kinds of things really do get in the way of that. But clearly, the live presentation certainly has strong advantages, and we'll probably get into a little bit of that as we talk today. We're going to start our conversation in the topic of the student involvement. So I would put this one to Scott. So what percentage of students have the means of access to learning opportunities that you've provided, and how many actually are participating in the distance learning with your what group of 25 or so kiddos, or how many do you have? Scott appears to be.
I think he froze.
Ah, he's back with us. Here, let's unmute you.
So if you asked a question, I did miss it.
I did. What percentage of your students have the means to access the learning opportunities that you have provided, and how many are participating in distance learning each day?
Right. So after schools closed, the first thing we did was send out a technology survey to families to see who needed help with internet access and who needed a device at home. And for the families who did need help with internet access, we referred them to Comcast because they were offering some free Wi-Fi package. And then for devices, administration over a 2-day span passed out, I think, around 250 iPads to families. So that was step one. And then Well, at City Springs, we're doing a combination of Google Classroom and live sessions. Google Classroom definitely looks better than live sessions. Our participation there is about 80, 85%, depending on the week. And our goal has been 70%. So we're pretty good on that front. Live sessions varies a lot by grade. It's anywhere from like 15% to 45%.
I see. I see. And actually, I'm kind of curious. My understanding is a lot of the middle level students at your school already had iPads, and so the additional were the families that did not have an older student in class, or where did those machines come from?
Oh, well, we already have a lot of iPad carts at school, so that's where they came from. Yeah. And we focused on the earlier grades first.
I got you. Matt,
Yes.
could you share with us answer to that similar question?
Sure. So just like Scott at City Springs, we're seeing similar things. We did a survey. We're at this point, we're 96.5% connected, but that just means that a student has, has Wi-Fi, has a device. We gave out several hundred Chromebooks. We're not using iPads. Then in almost every case, you need an adult in the household to help figure out Google Classroom and help create a space to do the work and help to monitor the work, especially in those lower grades. So we're about 96% connected. About, like Scott said, very similar, 70 to 80% completion and submission rates. But then for our more vulnerable populations like ESOL, lower income, like special education populations, we're seeing sort of a 30% completion submission rate, something like that. And then in terms of, we don't do the live, we're doing 3 lessons a week, recorded Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they post, and in each content area for each kid with some variation across grades. But the live portion that we're doing some live coach class, and we're doing some live community building, social emotional time with the kids. And that just varies greatly. You know, we've had 6 kids in a coach class, and we've had 15 kids in a coach class, and we've had 60 kids on a Zoom call for some community building work. So it's a kind of all over the place, but we're looking at maybe 25% that are participating in the live sessions. Like Tara and Scott, we're not seeing very solid numbers on the live lessons. And I think that's just hard for teachers who often have young children themselves to be scheduled at a time each day when 25 individual families will also be scheduled, and that part is tough. But there's a lot of good work going on.
I see. That's great. So the stumbling blocks really seem to be, what I'm hearing is basically it's an issue of scheduling. It certainly doesn't sound for want of equipment, no?
There is, just to catch that thought there, it's challenging when you're on these Zoom calls because only 2 people can talk at one time, and it's not synchronous. And so the call and response and some of the challenges there, I know, Scott, maybe you could share a little bit. In our planning call the other day, you were talking about a live session where one of your students was showing some things to you before you got to the instruction. But we're seeing some challenges with the, not necessarily, I mean, Zoom works the way it's supposed to work. It's just not ideal for replacing the in-person action. Scott?
Right. Yeah. I have not had any success trying to use live sessions to recreate a traditional DI, like 35-minute lesson from the classroom. It's been focused on the socio-emotional check-ins, maybe some like targeted questioning around material that's been introduced in those lessons that get uploaded to Google Classroom. And yeah, I mean, with like 4 and 5-year-olds, once you have like more than 3, 4, 5 kids on the same call, they're all in their pajamas. They're all trying to show you their toys. they're all trying to just catch up with each other because they miss their teachers, they miss their buddies. And so, yeah, like Matt said, Zoom works the way it's supposed to work, but it's not designed from the ground up for what we're trying to do.
I see. Well, thanks for that. Then maybe we ought to get to some of the stuff that is working in well in your buildings. And so you talked about doing the pre-recorded sessions. Matt, you want to talk a little bit about how you're accomplishing that?
So we have about 70 Google Classrooms up and running, and administrators and coaches are listed as co-teachers, so we can see what's going on. And teachers are posting lessons in all DI subjects, and the language and reading lessons are recorded, and the teachers pausing. You know, it can actually be more engaging than you imagine, just from my description. But we're not set up here to share, but we could share screen and wander through our Google Classrooms. If anyone listening to this call would like to check out some of the things that we're doing at Hampstead Hill, I could arrange to make that happen for a few minutes. So teachers are doing a part of the lesson, and then the students will do some independent questions, a check, the workbook, the skill book questions will be checked, usually in an abbreviated Google assessment form so that it can be online. But sometimes we're having students fill out the hard copy. They have their books at home in some cases, and parent takes a picture of it, sends it to the teacher. In Baltimore City, there's not a lot of traditional grading going on. And in our specific schools, teachers are providing feedback on the quality of the work that's turned in. But the district as a whole is looking really for completion and submission rates, not necessarily quality. And the phrase that they're using is, does the teacher know that the child's making a sincere effort, or that the family's making a sincere effort? So it's a more qualitative approach. Now, of course, there's specific quality issues, and you know, do you have it right? Do you have it wrong? Is the sound right? Is the sound wrong? Can the kid blend? And what do checkouts look like? And I mean, it's as you know, DI is very scientific, very specific in its fidelity to program. And we are not able to do that to our usual satisfaction. But I think it really does lend itself to the way that our teachers in pre-K and K and first grade are teaching reading and language online, which is these 15, 20-minute lessons followed by the assessment. So Scott or Tara, do you want to chime in on any of that?
Tara's going to dominate this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I'll just, kind of going back to what Scott mentioned before when he talked about, his experience with the student that was running around in his pajamas, and probably excited that Scott had a little insight into his house and wanted to show him everything that was in there. But he mentioned in that once you get over about 4 or 5 students logged into that live session, then you feel like you really can't get a lot accomplished. And I would say, with my experience, I did a live lesson for one of my schools, and I, intended for the lesson to have about 4 or 5 students, but they invited much more than that. So I think they invited 15 or 20 students to the session. So last week on the forum, I talked about some of the downsides of that. But I think what we learned in relation to what Scott said, one thing we learned with that is that it's good to do if you can have those small groups. So if you can have a group of about 4 students, you can make those live lessons functional if the students know that they're joining in, not to show you toys and to have conversations about things. But if they know they are joining in for a regular DI lesson, then I think it can work if you have that small group. If you Scott is exactly right. You start getting a lot of kids on there, and it's not really beneficial because you deal with a multitude of things that could happen. But I think what we've seen is that it can work if you are targeting those small groups. And a good place that some of my schools are plugging that in is an intervention. And so maybe it doesn't work for their group of 7 or 8 or 9 kids, but maybe it does work for those lower performing groups. And they have 3 or 4 students join in for intervention at one time. And those students can get some extra support that they likely need. And so I think that, again, the students have to know, and the parents likely have to know that this is what we're doing. When we log in, we sign in, we're doing a DI lesson. So I think that expectation has to be set on the part of the school as well as at home.
I see. Scott, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, so Matt mentioned that the district is looking for like a sincere, good faith effort, like participation in online learning. And the way I find myself relating these like live sessions to the Google Classroom assignments, in addition to being like a socio-emotional check-in, like taking the opportunity to talk to mom, talk to dad, and kind of probe around and get a sense of like the level of engagement from the just from like the whole family. Because I can go into Google Classroom and see that a student like hit the submit button and turned it in, but it doesn't tell me whether the parent like gave the iPad and walked away or was like doing the assignment. So it gives me a chance to do some like amateur sleuthing a little bit.
I see. Yeah, that's kind of curious. Yeah, what have you done to increase that buy-in from the students and their families? Have you noticed a decline in the motivation, or pretty much held steady at the same level? Or, and then how have you been able to get them on board with this?
Yeah, well, on my end, fortunately, I haven't seen too much of a decline. And I think like a big reason for that is that at City Springs, we've really tried to scaffold the whole process for families. We didn't start by throwing like 3 or 4 different online platforms at them with different sets of like passwords and usernames and class codes. We started by just checking in, making sure everyone is healthy and safe, sending out the technology survey, and then with those things in place, making the push for engagement with Google, with live sessions. And then also, I mean, at least on my end, I try to have a sense of urgency, but also be reasonable about my expectations about the demands I'm putting on like a parent's time with the assignment workload, because some parents are still working. Some kids have lots of siblings. And so I don't want to assign something that takes like 3 or 4 hours to do. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's like, in addition to doing positive things to increase buy-in, it's also what you're doing to avoid like needlessly frustrating parents. So I try to think of it from like both sides, and I'm curious to hear what like other people say.
Matt, do you have any?
We're not seeing, I mean, we're in Baltimore, unlike I imagine in North Carolina or in the South, where schools are beginning to close in early May. Our last day is currently either June 22nd or June 17th, depending on who you talk to. And the governor hasn't canceled schools for the year, but I'll give you a little insight. Today they came and collected, food services came and collected every scrap of food we had in the building, and they told everyone that no one's planning on being in the buildings for the rest of the year. So I don't think, no one thinks we're gonna be in school for the rest of the year, but this is a 12-week game in Maryland versus in parts of the country, it's a much shorter remote learning period. But 12, 13 weeks is there's some fatigue that I think will set in with parents, certainly teachers and students. But we're not seeing a drop off yet. In fact, this past week, the middle school had an 84% work completion and submission rate across the 270 middle schoolers. But we're doing things, incentives like things for the kids like pizza and different things that, delivering pizzas to houses. I know City Springs is doing some of that as well. You can be in a raffle if you turn in your work or you get connected. I think that individual relationships that with the teachers is what's driving the participation. And we see higher participation in classrooms where the relationships are particularly strong. Again, in best case scenario, you're seeing 30 to 40% of kids not submitting work. And so that's an enormous number of kids not accessing what we're calling school right now. And if this were to continue in the fall, which I hope and pray it won't, but if it were to continue in the fall, we need to adjust our thinking and come up with new strategies. And I think that's going to happen anyway as the world sort of changes and we figure out how to do remote learning better. But anyway.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like really engagement is the key that we're looking for here. The mastery, while it's desirable, the mastery aspect is kind of taking a second place to the engagement, which is pretty understandable. Before we move on to our next section, which is having to do with parent and family involvement, I'd like to invite any questions from the crowd watching us. Rochelle, do you have any questions in from the group?
Hi. Yes, I have had one for Tara. What platform were your schools using for the live lessons?
So my school was using Microsoft Teams for their platform. The downside, I think the reason they chose that was, well, one is that's because what their district had been using and was suggesting that they use. The downside, I think, with Zoom as a virtual platform was that if you have the free version of Zoom, I think you can only be logged in for 40 minutes at a time. So if you think your session could run longer than that, then that kind of pushes that platform out the door. Most of them don't, but if it did, then that wouldn't be the best option. I would say Microsoft Teams is pretty much what most of them are using. I find it a little difficult to use. I think, once you get the hang of it, it's very easy, but logging in initially and figuring it all out can be a little challenging. But that platform, also has some downsides, and we talked about that last week, and the fact that only 4 students, I believe, or 4 people can be seen at one time. And so in the event that you have 6, 7 students logging on, then you're not going to be able to see all of them at the same time. And I think that's another reason to keep those groups small if you're doing the live lessons, because that is really an engagement, something that keeps the students engaged, is being able to see your face, the teacher's face, and someone that they haven't been able to see in a long time. So if you remove that interaction and you can only see certain students, then that takes away from that a little bit. So again, just another reason, if you're doing that, no matter what platform you're using, they all have different glitches like that come about, but to keep those groups small.
And Tara, if I could add, Zoom extended the 40 minutes. During this pandemic. So if you have the free version, you can.
They logged on longer.
It will cue you and say, "Would you like to extend it first time you go over?" If you're in education, not if you're not in education.
Okay.
It has to be tied to education. And then we struggled because the district didn't want us to use Zoom. Because of the Zoom bombing problem. Mm-hmm. And actually, in our experience, and I'm biased only because it's what our teachers want to do and what works best, and you want technology as much as possible to fade into the background and actually get to the instruction. Mm-hmm. But the Zoom audio visual connection is superior, and the ability that Zoom recently, I guess a few weeks ago, made the default setting that you had to be in a waiting room, so you couldn't just appear in the room, and you could have passcodes and meeting ID numbers. Those security features our teachers really like. Another feature they like is that you can mute everyone and they can't unmute themselves. And so in Blackboard Collaborate, which is what our district wanted us to use, Blackboard Collaborate, you can mute everyone, but then they can unmute themselves. And as you were saying, if you've got 20 people in the meeting, you can only see 4 of them, and you don't know what the heck's going on with the other kids. And you know, it's sort of a trust them, but you certainly want to keep an eye on them. And so for us, it was Zoom. It was for especially for live sessions was far superior, and that was a steep learning curve for staff, as we had to get several key people to understand the features of Google Chats or Google Meet and Hangout, I think is what it's called, and FaceTime and Skype and Collaborate and all these different platforms.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I'll just add on to what Matt just said, and that's really great to know about Zoom. But the fact of, if you're for people out there who are looking for different virtual platforms to use, if you find a platform, I don't know if they can all do this or not, that the host or the teacher that is running the lesson can mute and unmute the participants, then that's really key. Because I know when my schools first started using Microsoft Teams and they were doing the live lesson with a couple of students, then they were having to tell them, okay, I called on you for an individual turn. So remember, when you hear your name, you have to unmute yourself and then mute yourself back. Well, that's a lot for a 5- and 6-year-old to manage sometimes. And so if you're in a platform where the host can do that and can mute and unmute for the students, then that makes the lesson go much smoother.
Scott,
I was going to say a nice thing real quick about Google Meet, because even though it's not perfect, if you're already using Google Classroom, then if a parent knows how to log into Google Classroom to submit assignments, then Google Meet is already integrated with Google Classroom. So there's just a link that you need to click on to go to that meeting. And it was pretty bare bones in the beginning, but with Zoom and Google Meet both in a competition to add features, it's getting better.
great, thanks. Rochelle, do you have another 1 or 2 questions?
Just a clarification really quickly. Someone asked to explain pre-recorded lessons. So just Tara, would you like to just share real quickly the difference between live and pre-recorded lessons?
Sure. So in my schools, and I know Matt and Scott both mentioned that their schools are using this as well. And my schools, teachers that are doing the recorded lessons are recording the DI lesson, the reading lesson, or the language lesson each day on a daily basis. And they are asking the questions, they're presenting the tasks, they're pausing for think time. And then after that think time is over, they're giving the correct answer. So we talked last week about not necessarily calling it an affirmation, because we don't know if they've gotten it correct or not when we can't see them, but we do give them that corrective feedback. And so it looks like a normal lesson would look with no students, but you're still inserting that think time, you're still inserting what the correct answer is. And then the schools have different platforms of how they get those links to parents. And then the parents and the students can view the link at their own schedule and at their own time. But my schools are doing a daily reading and a daily language lesson. And
they're getting through the whole lesson, or, I mean, that's what's videoed.
Right. That's a good question, because it typically does take a little bit longer. And I was actually watching some videos the other day to give some feedback on, and I noticed that some of the teachers had started dividing that up into 2 separate videos. And so they might have let's say if you have a reading mastery K lesson, you might have the presentation part of the lesson with the words and the sounds in one video, and then the story reading in a separate video, because especially at that level, the story reading has a lot more time that it can take. And so they were putting those in 2 separate videos. So if the student only had 15 minutes, 20, they could sit and do the presentation book, and then they could come back at a later time and do the story reading.
Great.
And there's different apps that people could check out, but Screencastify is one of them. Scott, you may have others that you guys are using. Screencastify where the teacher's picture appears small in the corner, and then so that they can see their teacher, but then the presentation book is much larger and they can point to it. Some of our teachers are actually moving the cursor around that has a yellow dot on it so that they can do, say it get ready, say it the fast way. I think that visual effect, and it puts teachers sometimes feel, as we all do, ill at ease. Seeing and hearing yourself on video can be alarming, especially in the quantity that we're all required to do it right now. And so if you're minimizing yourself over there in the corner of the screen, it's still interesting to students, but not this overwhelming billboard picture of yourself.
Yeah, just to add to what Matt just said, I probably should have been more specific, but when recording those lessons, like Matt said, your picture can be up in the corner, and that is a great place where teachers can use that Connect Ed as a resource. I think last week we talked about that they have a login available for students and parents and teachers that is free through the end of May, I believe. And so I really am I have some teachers that want to record and hold the presentation book up, which is fine as long as it's very visible. But that Connect Ed is a really great option, especially if you're doing any pre-recorded lessons for, say, transitions or Reading Mastery 2, because there is no presentation book to hold up for the students. They are used to having a textbook. And so if they don't have that at home, being able to display those words on the screen through Connect Ed is a great way to do those recordings, because you're in the corner, but they can see all of the words or the story right on the screen.
Great. Yeah, and I'd like to point out on our website, NIFDI.org, under the resources tab, a drop-down item that comes off to the side is online or distance learning. We've created 2 videos that do show, I believe it's the one on decoding, that the decoding video does show how to access Connect Ed and how to utilize it in your classroom, or in your virtual classroom, that is. So it's a great resource, definitely. Thanks for mentioning that, Tara. I think I'd like to move on, just in interest of time, move on to the parent involvement section that we have planned. So for the primary students, what role do the parents have in supporting these lessons in practice? You've alluded to some of that, and then also the intermediate, parents of the intermediate kids. What kinds of support do you look to them to provide at home? Scott, you want to hit that?
Sure. So definitely tech support, because the younger kids don't quite have the digital literacy needed to remember usernames and passwords and submit assignments. So I definitely lean on parents for that. And then my expectation is also that parents are supervising students when they participate in the assignments. And, hopefully they're not doing the assignments for students, and hopefully they're not just giving them the iPad and walking away. So yeah, those are the 2 main things: tech support and supervision.
Great. And Matt, maybe you could speak a bit to your intermediate students.
So I think that elementary students in general kind of need structure provided by an adult in their lives, and that the executive functioning is not quite there even at the 5th grade level to put their day together. We spend a lot of time working with parents, trying to help them come up with a plan for structure even during the school year. And we give out agenda books to all of our kids, and we're trying to help them with some of that work, planning ahead. And remote learning has just thrown a huge kink in all of that, because it's hard to figure out, just people. We have people who are essential workers and who are away all day, and the kids have, in Maryland, if you're an essential worker or if you're a doctor or nurse, you are the priority for childcare, and there's no childcare for anyone else. And so if, depending on whether you do or don't have childcare, your kid is going to be in a different place, or you may be trying to work from home yourself. So in the best case scenario, there's an adult that spends X hours a day reviewing the Google Classroom assignments, reviewing the due dates, reviewing the videos with their child. That's what we're asking them to do, which rips bare just enormous inequity in the space that people have to be quarantined in, the density in which they're quarantined, the wealth and opportunity that exists in lots of parts of the city and state and country. So it just depends on the circumstances in the house, which is a tragedy, because one thing that school is so good at is being a great equalizer in many respects, and kids are there, they have meals, they're not lining up at 18 sites around the city to get a meal. They are in a place that is safe, and that they've got people who know them and care for them. So it is tough. We're seeing we have our social workers and our guidance counselors and our psychologists doing teletherapy, and we have a Hopkins baby family therapist, and there's lots of parent support. But it's tough. But in the best case scenario, and where it's really working, you see an involved parent able to spend part of each day working on Google Classroom with their kid and working on the assignments.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious on the parent communication aspect. I understand with the recorded sessions, that's not necessarily it is not something that it avails itself to that, but in the live setting, are you able to, are your teachers able to carve out some time to connect individually with parents and address these kinds of concerns, or how is that working?
Our team, some of the kindergarten teachers split up the list and call all 96. We have an assistant teacher and a teacher in each classroom, and there's 30 to 32 kids in each class, and they're calling all of the kindergartners each week, and they're talking to parents and trying to, you can be troubleshooting the like Scott was saying, the Comcast Wi-Fi connection in one household. In another household, it's logging on to Google Classroom, or it's a broken, S on the keyboard on the Chromebook that we lent them, that we have to figure out how they can safely go get another Chromebook. So teachers are becoming TV producers. They are tech specialists, in addition to all of their other duties. And I think the wear and tear on teachers is just enormous, because it's teachers who know what is not happening more acutely than anyone else. And they're ready, more than any of us, to be back in school with full day, with full classes. And we all hope that happens soon. But yeah, it's parents are a key piece of the solution.
Yeah. Scott, would you have anything to add to that, or Matt pretty well cover?
I just wanted to add that, like in my case, since I've been using Class Dojo since the beginning of the year, it's just like a natural place for me to keep families in the loop. And Class Dojo will tell you who watches, like who sees your posts and who doesn't. And so then on a case-by-case basis, I can follow up with parents individually and work through whatever problems. So.
Nice. I like that. So we've been talking about going from using tablets and whatnot. Do you have parents who you support the distance learning via telephone? Is that being aside from obviously check-in kind of things, but are you doing any teaching or with utilizing the phone?
We are not. I don't know, Scott, do you know of anything like that at City Springs?
For check-ins, yes, but no, not for learning.
Not for the teaching. Okay.
Not for the teaching.
Tara?
Yes, I will say I have a school that started out pretty early using the telephone. They were pretty apprehensive about introducing a virtual platform to parents, because they didn't want to overwhelm them and they didn't want to add more things to their list. And so they wanted to very quickly, though, start collecting some data based on the recorded lessons they were doing. And so they started pretty early on calling students to administer the checkouts within the reading mastery programs. And so like Matt mentioned earlier, I think my school has, around 110 kindergarten students. And so there's only 2 teachers. And now they do have an interventionist that can help out with different things, but they would kind of divide and conquer. And so they might not complete a checkout with all students in one day, of course, but they might divide that over a couple of days. But they are using that regularly now, and they're able to collect that data for the checkouts on a regular basis. Aside from that, they started out using it as well for those higher priority students, so those lower performers. And the teacher or the interventionist might get on the phone and call and just do some fluency practice or story reading with those students. If the students, now they have slowly introduced a virtual platform for those low performing students. And so now some of those intervention students are using a virtual platform, but if they don't have access to internet, then they're still going through the phone to do some fluency practice as well.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Curious, so many parents are still working. They can't do schoolwork with their students until the evening. Some parents are feeling overwhelmed with what they're trying to balance. Do you have suggestions that you've given to them on how to support the students and balance their other responsibilities?
Well, on my end, I've tried to make the deadlines manageable. So just like at Matt's school, we upload lessons on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to Google Classroom. And so if a parent is having trouble, I just gently remind them that I might be uploading these videos Monday morning, but you have the rest of Monday, all of Tuesday to, to get to the lessons. And that's another reason I try to keep the lessons reasonably short and engaging, because I think it becomes that more frustrating for a parent if the child is getting bored and isn't looking forward to seeing their teacher and participating. But even then, I mean, there are parents that I'm getting radio silence from, and for my own sanity, I just keep trying and control the part of the process that I can, because sometimes that's detached from the outcome.
Yeah, it's very sensible, very sensible. Anybody have anything to add to any of that part of the conversation before we get to some questions from our listening audience?
I was just going to say that I think that everyone is overwhelmed at different times. And so we're seeing people very worried about details in terms of instruction or technology, but then just frankly, just overwhelmed. And so teachers are doing a lot more communication with parents, because it's all, commenting back and forth on Google Classroom, or there's a lot more opportunity, whether it's with Remind or Seesaw or Dojo or Google Classroom chat features, to just kind of be in real time. And we're encouraging, we're, our teachers have a 24-hour, we're asking them to check for emails 3 times a day, workday, but then have a 24-hour response time with parents, just so that they don't get overwhelmed with the volume of communication that's coming in.
Great. Rochelle, do we have any questions that would be good for our panelists at this time?
Yes, one quick question, and then I have one that's a little more detailed. You mentioned screen classify. Is that what
It's called Screencastify. Screencastify, and it's just their name brand. I think it's $29 for a year, maybe. But you can have a free version for a little while, and you can find it online. Screencastify, all one word. But there are a number of different similar programs, and that's the one that kind of popped up on our staff as being user-friendly.
Okay, thank you for clarifying the name. And then people can go online to check that out. We have another question on in the live sessions, the use of answering on Signal together, so unison responses. Tara, you gave us a little information on the pre-recorded sessions. Would you just give us a little summary of those live sessions and then also how we deal with group responses?
Sure. So I know last week on the forum, we talked about this in quite detail, where when you're doing a live session, because of the different internet speeds and the Wi-Fi access going on in all the different homes, it's really difficult to try to get unison responses from students, and like you typically would in a direct instruction lesson. And so what we have really transitioned to is utilizing mostly individual turns. And so instead of going through the lesson and having students respond in unison, you would designate a specific student to read certain words or certain sounds. Because of that, you're having to go back through the words or the sounds more frequently than what you might be used to or what the script dictates, because you want to make sure that all students get turns on the majority of the sounds or the majority of the words. And so the only time we really incorporated the unison response was when we did a correction. So if we bring a student in or a couple of students in because there was an error, we bring everybody in on that correction, because it's not as critical, since it's not a first time response, that everybody is together. And likely if one student made the error, there might be another student that was going to make the same error. And so that was really the only time that we brought in the unison responses and really utilized those individual turns throughout the entire lesson.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so one last question right now. Let me find that. You've discussed a couple of different times about giving feedback or corrections to students in terms of that it's not something that we do during the pre-recorded lessons. Would anyone be available to speak about what kind of feedback and corrections you are being able to provide to students via the platforms you're using?
Sure, I can speak to that. So as you know, we use Google Classroom for the uploaded assignments, and our principal gave us a little mini coaching session the other day on how to create a comment bank in Google Classroom. And so if you have that set up, you can create an assignment on Google Classroom, make it a Google document, make it a Google Slides, and if you make a copy for each student, then when they submit the assignment and attach whatever you've asked them to complete, then when you go into that assignment, you can draw on that comment bank and give feedback. And if that sounded overwhelming, you could also use like the, you can use private comments, you can use the public comment feature to give shout outs. And I've seen some like straightforward tutorials online navigating that as well. So that's the one piece of feedback. And then if I happen to see that student for a live session and the parent is there, which they usually are, it also gives me another opportunity to check in with families, especially for like new skills and things like that.
And we would be similar in terms of feedback going through Google Classroom. And the specific kinds of feedback, though, would be related to the assessment. And, you know, occasionally we're having parents film their kid watching the video with the call and response, and just kind of shocked how well it works. When this is, I'm thinking of Jesus, a particular first grader, and his mom filmed it and then sent it to the teacher, and then it got passed around with admin and coaches. But that's more anecdotal than sort of feedback at scale. And so it's really, with the pre-recorded sessions, really about what you're putting into the assessment and what they. One thing we published was the little cheat sheet on the sounds and blending that NIFDI has, and so parents can see. I mean, a lot of the conversation in the presentation on the pre-recorded lessons for the smallest children is the teacher saying, parents, check on this, or here's a correction procedure, or here's a thing that you can try if they're not saying it the way that I'm saying it. And so it's sort of like little mini digestible bites of information for the parents to keep an eye on what's happening during that. So the feedback is proactive and pre-correcting things, but certainly not real time and certainly not based on a student response in the moment.
Great. Great. Well, why don't we move on into the area of student engagement and motivation? So what kind of behavioral support strategies have you used to motivate the students and keep them engaged? I think you've touched on some of those, but maybe overtly answer that.
Right. Did you want to go ahead, Matt?
I was going to make a joke and say, well, the mute all button is a really good, we had teachers joke and say, like, if you could hide and mute any kid in your classroom anytime, teachers would all of a sudden have a brand new tool at their disposal, and kids would, in middle school, we've had some times where, the kid doesn't put their own name in or tries to change their name to somebody else's and act out. And if they still want to be there with their friends at that age, and so if you can mute them and hide them, but they can still sit there and see what else is going on, it's best case scenario for everyone except for the kid that wants to clown around a little bit. In terms of the real answer, though, read that question again for me, Brian.
Sure. What behavioral support strategies have you used to motivate students and keep them engaged?
So before I said, and I think in some of the questions, someone was saying, well, what do you use besides pizza? I think it's the engagement that the teachers are doing in the video. How engaging can they make it? Sometimes teachers are starting with a little social emotional thing. We have a special educator who was doing some second grade reading, direct instruction programming, and he's a Star Wars aficionado. And so he said, I'm going to show you this special Star Wars stuff that I've got, and maybe I'll show you some more if we do well in this next part. So letting the kids in on a little bit. Some teachers are like, here's my dog. Here's a TikTok I did. Here's here's something that is kind of a reason for the kids to tune in. Initially, we were having teachers read children's books and recording them, and we've got several dozen of those up on our website. I think that it's the personal connection that they can make. Teacher was doing a lesson that required something in the kitchen. And so, you're in her kitchen working on something. And I think that kind of thing can really motivate kids. And that teachers are kind of the biggest names in these houses where the kids are. Like Mr. Aguila, his name and what he says and what he, whether the kid was on, I don't know if you guys use blue or purple or, the color scheme at City Springs, but how well they did from a behavior perspective in a given day. That's the topic of conversation at dinner, and the parent asks, how did you do in Mr. Aguila's class today? And so the teacher holds great sway, and so I think showing a little bit of personal information without crossing any boundaries. You got to have a line there, a professional line, but that can really encourage kids to log on, find out what's going on, and see their teacher in a different light. Scott, were there things to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with all that. I try to put myself in the mindset after I've had my coffee that, like, this is my YouTube channel and I need to be engaging because students need to hit that like button and subscribe. So it helps me raise the stakes for myself. And then besides that, I mean, this is kind of specific, but if you are using Google Classroom and if you're creating assignments that involve using Google Slides, there's an add-on for Google Slides that I really like called Pear Deck. And what's cool about Pear Deck is that it makes it really easy to add drawing features, dragging features, embedding multiple choice questions, true and false questions. it makes it really easy to like record audio and insert it, which is not something that you can do in a straightforward way with Google Slides otherwise. And as a pre-K teacher, what I like about that is even if students don't know how to like type up responses or read the directions, they can still hear my voice, read the directions, and then they get to play with the drawing features, which helps me capture some of what we were doing on those independent assignments, anchor activities when we were still in school. So yeah, by making it more interactive in that way, I think that helps with motivation and engagement. And then the other thing I would add is with Class Dojo or just that kind of app, if you're not familiar with it, it lets students create their own little monster cartoon avatar. And then as the teacher, you can create different categories to assign points for like participation in Google assignments, participation in live sessions. And so throughout the week, the parent gets that notification on their phone that says, oh, hey, like, yep, Jalen's completing her assignments. I know that. And I see her getting recognition for it. That way it doesn't have to be a pizza party all the time.
Nice. That's very cool, because that's one of the questions that we had kind of prepared ahead of time. We're talking about rewards and celebrations and, the fun little things that you're doing live, but then also are there, ask about students earning stickers to place on charts. Well, it's not terribly practical for you to be delivering those to their home. However, they can, they can still get that, and the parents get that. That's a really fantastic adaptation of the technology. Good for you. Can you tell me, with regard to instructional strategies, have you, had changed in terms of like your verbal delivery? Do you find yourself having to be maybe a little more over the top than you have been? I've never observed you actually teaching. I'm sure you're very engaging in any venue. But Scott, how does that work for you?
Yeah, when I first sat down to record lessons, I thought it would be easier because I wouldn't have to use any cognitive bandwidth to pay attention to like student misbehavior and worry about managing that in real time and, giving like verbal corrections like that. But it's sort of a wash because I realized that, yeah, when I'm using Screencastify and I'm referencing the script and I'm giving that wait time, I have to like in my head sort of simulate what the students are supposed to be saying. Otherwise the pacing is going to be all messed up. And so it's a new interesting set of challenges. I think I was definitely like more stoic at first in front of the screen, but like Matt mentioned, it helps to minimize yourself and put yourself in the corner. It helps you forget about yourself. And then, yeah, once you start teaching, the gestures and the inflections come back. But I do find myself, trying to be more animated.
Earlier in about a month ago or so, we did do a webinar having to do with critical phrasing and talking about inflection and pause and punch and things like that. And it's perhaps even more important now. And that's interesting insight in terms of how your style has evolved in that virtual classroom. So neat stuff. Tara, did you have anything to add to any of that, or?
Well, I'll just add kind of on top of what Scott said. I think, we always talk about when you're in front of students, the more excited you are about a lesson, the more excited they will be, right? And so I think even if you're doing a video recording, that's going to be even more important, because I think someone mentioned earlier, you want to give those students a reason to tune in. And if you have that relationship already, then that's going to be one reason they want to tune in. But the more excited you are about that lesson, the more likely they will want to log in every day and to watch that video. And I've seen a lot of different things. I was watching one video the other day. So even in a recorded lesson, aside from just making the lesson excited, there was a teacher and she had a little jar with pre-written tickets, and each ticket had a little special activity or celebration, as we call them in Texas, that the students could do. And she did them after every single word list, and they took no more than about 10 seconds. So she'd pull the ticket, she'd say, oh, we're going to do the throw stars and you catch them. And she'd make these funny noises and throw stars at the students and they were supposed to catch them. And she'd do that so frequently that I'm sure for the students on the other end, that was something exciting that she incorporated to keep them tuning in and wanting to watch those lessons.
Great, great. That's neat. Yeah, those are fun things. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're just a little past our 1 hour mark. So I'd like to turn it back over to Rochelle. Do we have any other questions related to this or some closing questions here?
Let me see where we're at on that. I did have one more. If you could go back over the programs you are using with your students. I think Matt, you had listed off some, and there was a follow-up question on that. Just wanting to hear those again.
So there's some, Scott and City Springs and Hampstead Hill, both Baltimore curriculum project schools, use Dojo at various grade levels. So Dojo is a very good program. There's other programs called Remind or Seesaw. I'm trying to think what else, Scott, is there any, or Tara, is there anything that comes to mind in terms of, and then you've got the sort of direct messaging aspects that are built into the programs like Google Classroom or Zoom chat and that kind of stuff that you can do in real time. But those are some of the ones that we're using. And one thing we're doing to keep people connected, for the first 15 days of the closure, I did a daily robocall to all 900 kids, 100 staff, and all the same call. It was just a minute and a half, and we're down to Monday, Wednesday, Friday now. But we're giving them information about grades and how to pick up a laptop, and a number of our families are food insecure. So like we did a fundraiser. We raised $17,000 in 10 days, and we gave $100 gift cards to grocery stores out to specific families. And so having some structure in the school where you can have a director of community outreach, or you need to have somebody that can deal with the connectivity, the devices, the food issues, the questions about grading and how this is all going to look, what promotion looks like for next year. And it keeps your parent community, I think, calm and more engaged when you are doing that kind of thing where you're kind of acknowledging that this is not normal, but here are some of the things we're doing to try to work within the new rules.
Great.
Thank you. Matt, one of the specifics they were asking about was the DI programs that you're using in terms of students as well. But I think that was a very nice recap for us.
Sorry, we use DI programs in reading and language, in pre-K, first grade, and then 3rd through 5th grade. For pre-K through 5th grade, DI reading and DI language. And we use other programs, Singapore mathematics, and other programs in other content areas, core knowledge, but all the way through. And I really need to say that in my 17 years as principal at Hampstead Hill, the only reason that we're the #1 performing school in the city for years in a row, and that all of our kids leave kindergarten reading, is because of direct instruction and because of the quality of that research-based curriculum in the hands of talented teachers. Has really been just a game changer for our school community, and really made, you sort of always say that you stand on the shoulders of those teachers that the kids had before, or, alternatively, you're like, what happened down there in that other grade? But in our case, it's really direct instruction that has been the engine and driven the school improvement, and it makes our middle school is in the 93rd percentile in the state, and it's because of what happens in pre-KK and first grade. But we use DI, NIFDI programs, DI programs, McGraw-Hill in reading and language, all the way up through 5th grade.
Thank you very much. So, Brian, we did have one other suggestion after we're done. People wanted to stay on, and Matt wanted to share his screen to show us Google Classroom.
Oh,
You mentioned at the beginning that might be something people could stay on for. So go ahead, Brian.
I can't this afternoon. I had this scheduled till 5, and I've got some parents that I need to call before the end of the day. But I would be happy if someone wanted to get my email to do that. And feel free. I couldn't do it with more than about, I don't know, 5 or 6 people at a time. But Laura Doherty, who's the president of the Baltimore Curriculum Project and my great partner in the work these last 17 years, we'd be happy to go on a virtual tour at some point. Maybe NIFDI could help us coordinate that.
Probably, yeah, probably so. And we'll put your email address up here in just a few moments. Want to give you all one final opportunity. Our panelists, thank you for your time. Really, really appreciate it, and your patience through my attempts to fumble through hosting this. Do you have any final thoughts or words of advice to instructors or leaders out there who want to continue to make DI productive for students for the rest of their school year? Any glimmering little bits of hope?
All is not lost. Never surrender. You've got a lot of kids relying on you out there, and they're the reason that you should try to make your videos interesting, and they're the reason why you should try to put some structure into your day and take care of yourself, but also participate in forums like this and reach out to colleagues, and don't be scared of technology. Be your own entrepreneur. And I think great things can happen, but it just looks different than it did. And so it just, like Tara's idea of having a small group of kids in an intervention setting is brilliant. Like talk to your administrators, talk to your colleagues, get things like that going so that the most challenging kids that we work with you don't have what you could call, how we talk about summer slide. We don't want a coronavirus slide that is too great, that it make the work so much harder when we get back. Right. So set some goals and be positive.
Thanks for that. Scott, Tara?
Yeah, just take care of yourself, and don't forget to celebrate the small, modest victories as well as the bigger ones. And
yeah, I'll just add basically to go along with what Matt said. I mean, one thing that teachers are known for is finding ways to make things better, right? And that's what they do. And so I would just encourage teachers that are out there because unfortunately we don't know how long this is going to last. Hopefully next school year everybody's back in person, but continue to find those ways to make it better. And I think I said this last week, if you say no to an idea because you think, oh, well, I'm not going to get 100% of my students doing that, then you'll never do anything. So if you get 40%, if you get 60%, then that's 60% of your students that you may have saved from a larger learning gap. And so just because you don't have 100% doesn't mean you shouldn't try it and do it with those students that you can do it with.
Excellent. Boy, all three of you, those are great words of advice. Fantastic. So that's going to bring to an end our actual formal part of this. Hopefully you're seeing, there we go, not that. I don't do PowerPoint as much in my regular day-to-day. So as it says, thank you for joining us today. The session has been recorded. It's going to be on our YouTube channel as well as our website. We're going to have more virtual events related to distance learning, so please check our website regularly for updates. Remember that NIFDI is available to deliver virtual training and coaching to you and your staff. So if you want more information, please contact us at info@nifdi.org. Thank you all again for joining us. Stay healthy and probably ought to go wash your hands, I'd say. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.